My name is Erin, and the night my life finally snapped in half did not happen in a car wreck or a breakup or anything dramatic you could warn yourself about. It happened at Easter lunch with glazed ham steaming in the center of the table, plastic eggs scattered in a pastel basket, and my mother smiling like she was hosting a magazine shoot. One minute my aunt was laughing too loud at a story I barely heard, forks clinking, napkins in laps, everyone doing that careful family performance. The next minute my mother set her fork down hard, not yelling, not even raising her voice, just enough sound to cut through everything. She turned, pointed straight at me, and said, "Word for word, you are the reason this family is always falling apart." The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. Every face turned, waiting. Waiting to see if I would shrink, like I always did, or explode, like she always claimed I would. Then she added, calm as a judge, "If you cannot handle the truth, there is the door. No one is forcing you to stay." I stood up. I did not cry. I did not argue. I picked up my bag, and I walked out. 2 weeks later, she called me screaming one question: why? The thing people do not understand about a moment like that is how ordinary it looks from the outside. If you walked past our dining room window right then, you would have seen a neat table, a ham, tulips in a jar, and a group of adults dressed like they had it together. You would not have seen the way my mother had been lining me up for that shot all morning, the little digs, the quiet corrections, the way she watched me like I was one wrong breath away from embarrassing her. We were at her house in Maple Glen, the one she liked to call the family home even though it had only been hers for a handful of years. It was the kind of house that looked warm in photos: white porch railing, wreath on the door, spotless windows. Inside it smelled like lemon cleaner and sweet rolls and something sharp underneath, like the air had been scrubbed too hard. My sister Paige was there with her husband, and my brother Tyler showed up 10 minutes late like he always did, breezing in with a grin and a store-bought pie as if that fixed everything. My Aunt Linda kept saying how nice it was to have everyone together, as if saying it could make it true. I had been the one to arrive early. I always arrived early. I helped carry dishes. I wiped down counters. I asked if she needed anything. It was the old instinct in my bones. If I am useful, maybe I will not be a problem. She had hugged me at the door with that tight, staged kind of affection, her cheek pressed to mine just long enough for anyone watching to think it was love. Then, still holding my arm, she whispered, "Try not to get sensitive today, Erin. It is Easter. We are all tired of drama." I remember blinking, not because I did not understand, but because I did. Drama, in her world, did not mean yelling or insults or cruelty. Drama meant my reaction. Drama meant my face showing hurt. Drama meant me not swallowing whatever she served. At the table, the conversation floated in that safe, shallow way it always did. Weather. Tyler talking about work. Paige pretending she did not notice her husband checking his phone. My Aunt Linda telling a story about her neighbor. I nodded when I was supposed to. I smiled when I was supposed to. I took a small serving of ham and a spoonful of potatoes, and I chewed like my throat was not tight. My mother sat at the head of the table. She loved that seat. She loved being the center, the organizer, the one who could say, "Look what I made. Look what I held together." She wore a pale blue cardigan that matched the decorations, and pearl earrings that made her look softer than she was. At some point, my aunt joked about how my mother should host every holiday because she was so good at it, and my mother laughed, one hand fluttering like she was embarrassed, but her eyes went right to me. Not warm, not playful. Measuring. Then Paige made the mistake of saying something kind to me. It was small, almost nothing. She just said she liked my hair and asked where I got it done. I answered, and I could feel my mother stiffen beside her plate, like kindness toward me shifted the balance of something she needed. That is when it happened. The fork, the plate, the sound. A clean, sharp clink that silenced the room the way a slammed door would. My mother did not look angry. That is the part that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. Her expression was controlled, almost thoughtful, like she had been waiting for the right opening. She pointed at me, not with the fork, but with her finger, like she was accusing me of a crime. "You are the reason this family is always falling apart," she said. Tyler's mouth stayed slightly open. Paige froze with her glass halfway to her lips. My Aunt Linda stared at the tablecloth. No one moved. No one said, "That is enough." No one said, "That is your daughter." No one said, "What is wrong with you?" My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands went cold on my napkin. For a second I thought I might actually laugh, because it was so absurd. The timing, the performance of it, the way she chose Easter lunch like she was making a point. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. "If you cannot handle the truth, there is the door," she added, her voice steady, almost reasonable. "No one is forcing you to stay here." She said it like she was offering me a fair option. She said it like she had not just set me on fire in front of everyone. I felt something shift inside me. Not a big dramatic snap, more like the quiet click of a lock finally turning. I had spent my entire life trying to find the right tone, the right words, the right level of emotion that would make her treat me like a person. I had apologized for being hurt. I had apologized for looking upset. I had apologized for things I did not even do, just to smooth the air. And in that moment, I realized there was no version of me that would be acceptable to her if it did not include being small. So I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the wood floor. The sound made Tyler flinch. My mother's eyes widened a fraction, like she had not expected me to actually move. "Aaron," Paige whispered, warning or pleading, I could not tell. I did not look at her. If I looked at her, I might break. If I broke, my mother would win. I picked up my bag from the chair beside me. My fingers trembled on the strap. I stood up slowly, not rushing, not dramatic, just standing like a woman who had finally decided she would not beg to be allowed to exist. My mother tilted her chin, still pointed at me, still calm, still in control, as if she was waiting for me to apologize on my way out. Instead, I turned and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, someone made a small sound, like a swallow or a sigh. No one followed. No one called my name. The hallway was lined with framed photos, the kind families put up to prove something. Christmas mornings, beach trips, Paige in her cap and gown, Tyler holding a fish like it mattered, and me in the background of so many of them with a fixed smile that never quite reached my eyes. It was like walking past versions of myself who had all agreed to be quiet. My mother had a little wooden sign on the wall that said "Blessed." I remember seeing it and thinking, blessed by what? Exactly. I reached the front door. My hand was shaking as I turned the knob. For a second I paused. Because part of me expected someone to rush up, to stop me, to say, "Please do not go like this." Part of me still wanted that, even after everything. But the house stayed silent behind me. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind of early spring chill that feels clean compared to the stale warmth inside. Sunlight bounced off the neighbor's car. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Ordinary life humming along like my world had not just cracked. I walked to my car, got in, closed the door, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. My chest felt tight, like I could not get a full breath. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry, not because crying is weakness, but because I had been trained to believe it was. I could already hear my mother's voice, see how she would tilt her head and say, "There you go again, always making a scene." I started the engine and pulled away. In my rearview mirror, her house looked the same as it always did: tidy, respectable, safe. It could have been any house on any street. No one could see the fire inside it. By the time I reached my apartment in Cedar Ridge, my shoulders ached from holding myself stiff. I parked in the garage and just sat, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, watching the concrete wall in front of me like it had answers. The city around me was bright and indifferent. People came and went, grocery bags, dog leashes, keys jangling. No one knew that a mother had pointed at her daughter over Easter ham and declared her the cause of everything wrong. I finally forced myself out of the car, rode the elevator up, and stepped into my apartment. It was quiet. My small place smelled like the candle I lit this morning before I left: vanilla and cedar, comfort I bought for myself because no one else would. I tossed my bag on the couch and kicked off my shoes. My phone buzzed in my hand like it was alive. 2 missed calls, both from Paige, one from Tyler. A text from my Aunt Linda that said, "Honey, please come back. Your mom is upset." Upset. Not ashamed. Not sorry. Upset. Then another message. This one from my brother. "Where did you go, Erin? You did not have to be so dramatic." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Another buzz. My mother. "If you walk out on your family, do not expect us to keep chasing you," her text read. "You ruin every holiday with your attitude." I was being honest. Maybe you should take a hard look at yourself for once. My stomach flipped. The old reflex rose up, the one that always made me type back, "I am sorry, I did not mean to cause trouble. I just felt hurt. Please do not be mad." My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Then I set the phone down. I sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the same sound I had heard at her table when the room went silent. It felt like the silence had followed me home. For a few minutes, I let myself feel it all at once: the humiliation, the anger, the grief, the relief. Relief was the strangest part. It sat heavy in my stomach like a warm stone. Because I had done it. I had left. I had not begged. I had not pleaded. I had not tried to fix it. And that terrified me, because if I could leave once, that meant I could leave again. That meant I might never go back to the version of myself who stayed and swallowed. I turned my head and looked at my phone on the cushion beside me. Another text came through from Paige. "Please, Erin, just talk to her. You know how she is. You know how she is." The sentence that had trapped us all for years. Like her behavior was weather we could not change, just something we had to dress for and endure. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. My mind kept replaying the table, the pointing finger, the calm voice, the way no one defended me. The betrayal was not just my mother's words. It was the way everyone else let them land and then watched to see what I would do with the damage. I thought about calling someone, about telling the truth, but my throat tightened at the idea. Like speaking it out loud would make it real in a way I could not take back. So instead, I sat there in the quiet, and I let the questions come. Was I really the reason things were tense? Was I really too sensitive? Was it possible I had imagined the sharpness in her voice all these years? Was it possible I deserved that finger in my face? Then, in the middle of all that self-doubt, another thought pushed through, steady and clear. If I was truly the problem, why did I feel lighter the moment I walked out? That night, I did not eat dinner. I stood at my kitchen sink and drank water like it could wash the taste of Easter ham and humiliation out of my mouth. I changed into sweatpants and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my hands. I realized I was waiting. Waiting for the next move. Waiting for her to call and rage or cry, or both. waiting for the hammer to drop the way it always did when I tried to step out of line. But the phone stayed quiet. I checked it anyway, too many times, out of habit, out of fear, out of the strange hope that someone would finally say, "She went too far. I am on your side." No one did. Before I fell asleep, I opened my notes app and typed a single sentence. Not a plan, not a speech, just a truth I needed to see in plain words. She told me to leave, and I left. I stared at that line for a long time. It should have been simple. It should have been the end of it. But deep down, I knew it was not about the lunch. Not really. Lunch was just the moment she decided to do it in public, to make sure everyone saw me in my place. And if she was willing to do that with a smile and a plate of ham in front of her, then she was protecting something much bigger than her pride. I did not know what it was yet. I only knew this. The silence she left me in was not peace. It was the first warning. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime and a blink. When her call finally came, it would not be to ask if I was okay. It would be because something in her world had started to crack. And for the first time, she was the one who could not handle the truth. But that was still ahead of me. For now, all I had was the quiet, my apartment, my shaking hands, and the uneasy feeling that walking out of that house had set something in motion I could not stop. The morning after Easter arrived without any sense of apology. Light slid through my bedroom blinds like nothing had happened, pale and ordinary, and for a few seconds I lay there disoriented, my body heavy, my mind slow, until the memory caught up with me and settled on my chest. I did not jump out of bed the way I usually did on workdays. I lay there listening to the hum of the city outside my window, a garbage truck down the block, someone's footsteps on the stairs, life moving forward without checking in with me. My shoulders felt tight, like I had slept braced for impact. My jaw ached from clenching it all night. The first thing I reached for was my phone. I hated that about myself, the reflex, the quiet hope that someone would have woken up and decided to do the right thing. I half expected a message that said she went too far. I am sorry. Are you okay? There was nothing like that. A few notifications sat there waiting, but none of them were what I needed. A missed call from my brother at 11:30 the night before. A text from my aunt sent just after midnight that read, "Hope you got home safe. No follow-up. No acknowledgement of what had been said to me in front of everyone." I stared at the screen until it dimmed and locked itself, then rolled onto my side and closed my eyes again, even though sleep was not coming back. When I finally forced myself up, my apartment felt unfamiliar in the daylight. The quiet I had noticed the night before was louder now, stretching through every room. I made coffee and forgot to drink it, letting it sit on the counter while I leaned against the fridge, replaying the sound of my mother's fork hitting the plate, the way her finger had landed on me like a verdict. I told myself to focus on practical things. Shower. Get dressed. Eat something. Pretend this was a normal Monday morning. In the shower, the hot water loosened my muscles but not my thoughts. I stood there longer than usual, letting it pound against my shoulders, as if it could rinse off the feeling of being exposed. I kept seeing everyone's faces around the table, frozen, careful, the way they had all chosen stillness over discomfort. By the time I got dressed, my phone started buzzing again. This time, it was Paige. Her message came in carefully, like she had edited it 10 times before hitting send. Mom did not mean it the way it sounded. She is under a lot of stress. You know how she is. Maybe you could call her and clear the air. Clear the air. As if the problem had been a misunderstanding, a smudge that needed wiping, not a sentence aimed directly at my chest. I typed a response and deleted it. I typed another and erased that too. Every version of the truth sounded too sharp or too weak, and I could already hear how it would be twisted. Instead, I set the phone down and went to work. My job has never been glamorous, but it has always been steady, predictable, a place where people say what they mean most of the time. Sitting at my desk that morning, answering emails and organizing files, felt surreal, like I was playing a role in someone else's life. My coworkers talked about their weekends, about egg hunts and traffic and weather, and I nodded and smiled and kept my voice even. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tyler. "You did not have to walk out like that," his message said. "You embarrassed her. We were all just trying to have a nice Easter." I stared at the word embarrassed until it lost its shape. He had not said she embarrassed you. He had not said what she said was wrong. He had skipped straight to the part where my reaction became the offense. I could feel the old familiar heat rise in my chest, the urge to explain, to defend myself, to break down the moment frame by frame until he understood why I had left. I wanted to say she pointed at me. She blamed me for everything. She told me to leave. But I knew how that would go. He would say, "That is not what she meant." He would say she was just being honest. He would say, "You know how she talks." I did not respond. The rest of the day unfolded like that. A slow drip of messages and missed calls that all circled the same unspoken agreement. What happened mattered less than how I handled it. Her words were treated like weather, unfortunate, but unavoidable. My leaving was treated like a choice I had made to disrupt the peace. By the time I got home that evening, my head was throbbing. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my bag by the door, then stood there staring at the wall, trying to shake the feeling that I was already being rewritten. I checked my phone again, against my better judgment. There was a new message from my mother. "I hope you slept on it and realized how hurtful your behavior was," it read. "We are a family, Erin. Families do not walk out because they hear things they do not like. I have always been honest with you, even when it is uncomfortable. That is what good parents do. When you are ready to apologize, we can talk." My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the counter. There it was. The story already complete. She had not said anything wrong. She had simply told the truth. I had been too sensitive to handle it. I owed her an apology. I leaned over the sink and took a few slow breaths, the way I had learned to do when my emotions threatened to spill over. I pressed my palms flat against the cool surface and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to collapse into the apology she was waiting for, just to make it stop. That pull was strong, muscle memory from years of doing exactly that. Instead, I stayed where I was and let the anger sit there without turning it into action. Later that night, Paige called me. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me needed to hear another human voice, even if it hurt. I answered and put the phone on speaker, pacing the length of my living room. She sounded tired, the way people do when they are carrying someone else's emotions. "Erin," she said softly, "why did you have to leave like that? You know how Mom gets. You made it worse." I stopped pacing and stood by the window, watching headlights slide past below. She pointed at me and told me I was the reason our family is always falling apart, I said. She told me to leave. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "She did not mean it literally," Paige said. She was upset. She felt attacked. "Attacked by what?" I asked. "By you saying my hair looked nice?" Another pause. "You know she feels like you are always judging her," Paige said. "She thinks you look down on her." I laughed then, a short, hollow sound that surprised even me. "Look down on her," I said. "I have spent my entire life trying not to upset her." Paige sighed. "I am not taking sides," she said quickly. "I just think it would be easier if you called her and smoothed this over. She is really hurt." hurt. Again, the focus landed neatly on her feelings, as if mine were an inconvenience that could be postponed. I felt something sink in my stomach then, something heavier than anger. It was the realization that even now, after what she had said in front of everyone, my sister's instinct was still to manage my response, not question my mother's behavior. "I am not calling her to apologize," I said quietly. Paige went silent, then said, "Erin, please do not make this bigger than it already is." Bigger. As if the size of it were my choice. We ended the call shortly after that, both of us saying we needed to get some rest, both of us knowing that nothing had actually been resolved. That night, I barely slept again. I kept waking up with the same thought looping through my head: how quickly it all flipped, how easily the story shifted from what she did to how I reacted. By the third day, the pattern was unmistakable. A cousin I barely spoke to messaged me out of the blue, saying she heard things were tense and reminding me that life is short. An aunt commented on one of my social media posts with a vague line about forgiveness. Someone had told them something, and it was not the part where my mother had publicly blamed me for the family's problems. I started to see the shape of it, the outline of a version of events that painted her as wounded and me as volatile. I could almost hear her voice as she explained it to them, how she had only been honest, how she had tried so hard, how I had stormed out and ruined Easter. What struck me most was not the exaggeration, but the consistency. The way every retelling removed her finger from my chest and replaced it with my supposed overreaction. I spent that evening alone on my couch, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything. The silence from my family had shifted. It was no longer shocked or confused. It was purposeful. That was when the doubt crept in. It slid into my thoughts quietly, wearing the voice I knew so well. "Maybe you did take it too far. Maybe you should have stayed and talked it out. Maybe you really are the reason things are always tense." I caught myself nodding along to that voice, the same one that had kept me apologizing for years, and I felt a wave of exhaustion crash over me. I had done this dance so many times before. She would say something cutting. I would react. Everyone would focus on my reaction. I would apologize. Things would reset, with me just a little smaller than before. The difference now was that I had not apologized yet. On the fourth day, something else happened. Something small enough that I might have missed it if I had not been paying attention. My brother sent me a message asking if I could forward him some information from an old account our mother had once asked me to help manage. It was casual, almost offhand, like he assumed I would say yes without thinking. I stared at the message for a long moment. It was not unusual for her to delegate things like that to me. I had always been the one who handled the paperwork, the follow-ups, the details no one else wanted to touch. It had been framed as trust, but it also meant I knew things others did not. "Why do you need it?" I asked. There was a longer pause than usual before he replied. "She is stressed," he said. "There are some things she wants to make sure are covered." Things. Covered. The word lodged itself in my mind, refusing to settle. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just family logistics. Just another example of her wanting control over everything. Still, I did not send the information right away. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the way my mother's voice had sounded on the phone. Not angry, not remorseful, but certain. Certain that the family would close ranks. Certain that I would come back and take the blame. I realized then that the silence was not just about punishment, it was about pressure. It was meant to push me back into my role without anyone having to say it out loud. And for the first time, instead of rushing to relieve that pressure, I wondered what would happen if I did not. What would happen if I stayed quiet long enough for the cracks to show? By the end of the week, The initial flurry of messages slowed, replaced by a careful distance that felt calculated. No one invited me to the usual Sunday dinner. The family group chat went quiet, then resumed without me. Inside jokes and photos appearing like proof of continuity. It stung more than I wanted to admit. There is something uniquely painful about being excluded by people who insist you belong. But underneath that pain was a strange, steady awareness. If my absence caused this much discomfort, then my presence had been doing more work than I realized. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a bowl of soup growing cold in front of me, my phone lit up again. This time, it was my mother calling. I watched it ring until it stopped. I did not know yet what I was looking for, or what I would do when I found it. I only knew this. The version of me who rushed to fix things was gone, at least for now. And in the quiet that followed, I began to sense that what was unraveling was not just our relationship, but something deeper my family had never wanted me to see. I went to bed that night with the uneasy feeling that Easter had not just exposed a wound, it had disturbed a structure that depended on me staying exactly where I was. And structures do not react well when the piece holding them steady steps away. By the second week, the quiet had settled into my apartment like a thin layer of dust, not dramatic, not obvious, just everywhere, if I paid attention. I went to work. I smiled at coworkers. I answered emails. I bought groceries and stood in line like a normal person, but inside I felt like someone had turned the lights down. My mind kept circling the same question until it wore a groove into me. Why was it always me? Not why did my mother say what she said at Easter. Not even why did no one defend me. I had a lifetime of half answers for that. The question that would not leave me alone was simpler and heavier. Why did our family seem to need me to be the problem, the way some families need a storm to blame the broken roof on? I started noticing the small things, the assumptions tucked into messages, the casual way Paige said, "You know how mom is," the way Tyler acted like my leaving was an offense that required correction. Nobody asked what had pushed me to the edge. They just wanted me back in place. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, pretending to look at something work-related, and I realized I was not thinking about Easter anymore. Not really. Easter had been a spotlight. The real story was the stage underneath it. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was spiraling, that therapy jargon about scapegoats and roles was making me see patterns everywhere. But then my phone buzzed with another message, this one from my aunt, and the words landed like a familiar hand on the back of my neck. "Your mother loves you," she wrote. "She has always been honest with you, even if it is hard to hear. You have to stop taking everything so personally. Stop taking everything so personally." I sat there staring at that sentence, and something inside me quietly opened, like a door I had been keeping shut. Because I could suddenly see the shape of my whole life in it. Not the events, but the lesson. If I was hurt, it was because I chose to be. If my mother was cruel, it was because I heard it wrong. And once that door opened, memories came through in a line, not as a flood, but as scenes I had filed away and labeled, "Not that bad, just family. Everyone has stuff." I pushed my laptop away and leaned back in my chair. I was not trying to punish anyone by remembering. I just wanted to understand how I had been trained to doubt myself so completely that a woman could point at me over Easter ham, and I would still spend days wondering if I deserved it. The first memory that surfaced was small enough to seem ridiculous, and that is what made it so sharp. I was 8, maybe 9, standing in our old kitchen in a townhouse we rented before my mother started buying her idea of stability. I had dropped a glass. It shattered on the tile, bright pieces scattering like ice. I froze, my heart racing because I knew what was coming. Not because she would hit me. She did not need to. She had other ways. My mother rushed in, took one look at the broken glass, and her face changed. Not into anger exactly, but into something tight and offended, like my mistake had been done to her. "Aaron," she said, loud enough that my brother and sister could hear from the living room. "What is wrong with you? Do you ever think?" I remember the way my throat closed. I remember my brother peeking around the corner, eyes wide, then disappearing again, choosing safety. I remember my sister standing behind him, staring like she was watching a show she did not want to be part of. I whispered, "I am sorry." My mother did not soften. She grabbed a broom and started sweeping fast, aggressive strokes, the bristles scraping the tile. "Do you know how hard I work?" she said. "Do you know how much I do around here? And you cannot even carry a glass without making a mess." I tried to help, reaching for a paper towel, and she snapped at me. "Do not touch anything. You will just make it worse." That was the part that burned. The way she turned my attempt to fix my mistake into proof that I was incompetent. When it was finally cleaned up, she stood over me and said, "You need to learn to be more careful. You upset everyone when you do things like this. Upset everyone. Over a glass." That night, I climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling guilty in a way that did not match the crime. The next morning, I apologized again, even though she had not asked, because the air in the house felt wrong until I did. She accepted it with a small nod, like she was granting me permission to exist again. That was the first time I remember understanding that peace in our family did not come from fairness. It came from me taking the blame quickly enough. Another memory followed. Older. Heavier. I was 16. I had been accepted to a summer program at a college 2 states away. It was not glamorous, just a chance to take classes and live in a dorm for a few weeks. A small step toward the independence I wanted more than anything. I came home from school with the letter in my hands, heart pounding with excitement. My mother was at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables, and I held it out to her like an offering. She glanced at it, and for a moment her face stayed neutral. Then she set down the knife carefully, wiped her hands, and looked at me, the way she looked at strangers she did not trust. "So you are leaving me now," she said. I blinked. "It is just for the summer," I said. "It is only a few weeks." Her mouth tightened. "A few weeks can turn into a habit, Aaron. You get a taste of being away, and then you do not come back. That is how it starts." I did not even understand what she meant at first. I thought she was worried. I thought she was being a mother. Then she said, "Your father left because he did not like responsibility. I am not raising 3 kids alone just so you can abandon me too." The words hit me so hard I felt nauseous. I tried to protest, to explain, but she raised her hand as if she was stopping traffic. "I am just being honest," she said. "Someone has to be. You are impulsive, you do not think things through, and you always think about yourself first." I remember standing there with that acceptance letter in my hand, feeling like I had done something selfish by wanting a future. I remember my excitement collapsing into shame. Later that night, when my brother and sister asked what happened, I told them I decided not to go. I said it like it was my choice. My mother told people I had turned it down because I was mature enough to prioritize family, as if she had raised a daughter who understood loyalty. That was the trick. She would cut, then turn the cut into a virtue I supposedly chose. That pattern showed up everywhere once I started looking at it. When I cried, she said I was too emotional. When I stayed quiet, she said I was cold. When I set a boundary, she said I was dramatic. When I tried to explain myself, she said I was twisting things. There was no version of me that did not serve her narrative. The strangest part was how she wrapped it all in the language of truth. She loved the word honest. She used it like a shield. She said it before she said something cruel, as if the word itself excused what followed. I am just being honest, Aaron. I am not going to lie to you. Someone has to tell you the truth. In her mouth, truth was not a fact. It was a weapon with a clean handle, something she could grip without getting blood on herself. A few days after Easter, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store, Mrs. Klein, a woman who had known our family for years. She stopped me by the produce section and squeezed my arm warmly. "Your mother tells me you are going through a tough time," she said, eyes soft with concern. "She worries so much about you. You know she only wants the best." I felt my face go hot. "She told you that?" I asked. Mrs. Klein nodded. "She said you have been struggling with your emotions lately, that you take things the wrong way. But you have such a good heart, dear." I stood there holding a bag of apples like it was an anchor. I could have corrected her. I could have said, "She pointed at me and blamed me for the family falling apart." I could have said, "She told me to leave." Instead, I smiled weakly and said, "I am fine." The shame of that stayed with me all the way to my car. It was not just that my mother treated me like the unstable one. It was that she went out into the world and sold that version of me, and people bought it because it fit the story she wanted to be true. The devoted, struggling mother, the difficult, oversensitive daughter, and my siblings, in their own ways, helped keep it intact. Tyler dealt with her by joking, by turning everything into a shrug. Paige dealt with her by smoothing, by translating my mother's mood into instructions for everyone else. It was not because they were cruel. I do not think either of them woke up thinking, "How can we hurt Aaron today?" They were surviving. But their survival had a cost, and I was the one paying it. I saw it clearly in one particular memory, one that had always left a bitter taste in my mouth even before I knew why. I was 21 and working 2 jobs, saving money for my first apartment. I kept my savings in a separate account because it made me feel responsible, like I was building something stable. One afternoon my mother called, voice syrupy sweet, and said she needed a small favor, just temporarily. She had a bill, something unexpected, and she would pay me back as soon as things settled. I hesitated. It was not that I did not trust her exactly. It was that my trust always came with a tightness in my chest, like my body knew what my brain tried to deny. She heard the hesitation and her tone shifted. "Aaron, do you not trust me? After everything I have done for you." I transferred the money. Weeks went by. No repayment. Every time I brought it up gently, she acted wounded. "You act like I am stealing from you," she said once. "Do you have any idea how hurtful that is? I am your mother. I raised you. And you are nickel and diming me." I dropped it. Not because I could afford to, but because it was easier than being called selfish. I had convinced myself for years that it was just a messy family moment. Now I saw it for what it was. A test. A lesson. Your needs do not matter if they conflict with mine. When I came out of that memory, I realized my hands were clenched in my lap. My nails had dug crescents into my palms. I got up and walked around my living room, as if movement could shake the past off me. I stared out my window at the parking lot below, at people carrying groceries, at a kid on a bike, at a woman walking a small dog. Ordinary life. Ordinary families, maybe. I wondered how many of them had their own versions of this hidden behind their curtains. My phone buzzed again, and I flinched, the way I always did. It was Paige. A short message this time. "Mom says she is done chasing you. She says if you are going to be like this, she will just focus on the people who appreciate her. Please just do something, Aaron. Do something. Like an apology. Like a surrender. Like stepping back into the role I had been born into." I stared at the message, then set the phone down slowly. That was when it hit me, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a steady truth I could not unsee. My mother did not just react to who I was. She shaped who I was allowed to be, and my family, by staying quiet, helped her do it. Easter had not created this. It had exposed it under bright light. The role I played in my family was not accidental. It was a system. It had rules. It had rewards and punishments. It kept the peace by giving all the chaos a name, my name. And if that was true, if I had been assigned this role for years, then it served a purpose beyond my mother's feelings. People do not cling that hard to control unless something important depends on it. I thought back to Tyler's message about the old account, the one he wanted information from. I thought about the way he had said things need to be covered. I thought about my mother's certainty that everyone would fall back in line, as if the family had to look a certain way, had to move in certain patterns. What if it was not just pride? What if being the problem kept me too busy defending myself to notice what was actually happening? That idea sat in my mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples out slowly, touching everything. I did not have proof of anything yet. I did not even know what I was looking for. But for the first time in my life, I stopped asking myself whether I was overreacting, and I started asking a different question. Who benefits when I stay blamed? I went to bed that night without checking my phone a dozen times. I placed it face down on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. The darkness felt thick, but it also felt honest. Somewhere inside that darkness, I could feel a shift happening. Not in my family, not yet, but in me. I had spent years trying to convince myself my mother's version of me was true, because accepting it was easier than facing the idea that my own family could be built on something so twisted. Now I could not go back. The role had a name. The pattern had a shape. And once you see a pattern clearly, it is hard to pretend it is not there. I lay awake listening to my own breathing, and I made myself a quiet promise, not out loud, not to anyone else, just to the part of me that had been apologizing since childhood. I will not defend myself to people who are committed to misunderstanding me. In the morning, I knew I would start paying attention in a different way. Not with fear, not with frantic emotion, but with the calm focus of someone finally realizing that silence could be more than punishment. It could be power. The next few days passed with a strange kind of tension humming beneath everything I did, like a wire pulled too tight, but not snapping yet. I kept my promise to myself. I did not explain. I did not defend. I did not reach out first. From the outside, it probably looked like I was pulling away, licking my wounds, accepting my place. Inside, I was watching. Life did not stop just because my family had gone quiet. Bills still needed paying, work still demanded attention, groceries still had to be bought and laundry folded. I moved through those tasks carefully, deliberately, as if staying grounded in the ordinary was the only thing keeping me from drifting back into old habits. Midweek, my phone rang while I was leaving the office. I saw my mother's name flash across the screen and felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but I let it ring out. I stood in the parking lot for a moment afterward, keys in my hand, listening to the distant hum of traffic, reminding myself that I was allowed to take space. That silence was not cruelty. It was self-preservation. A few minutes later, a text came through from her. I need you to stop avoiding me. There are some things that need to be handled. Need, handled. The words felt heavier than the rest of her messages had been. Not emotional, not wounded, practical. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. Normally, I would have jumped to comply, to ask what she needed, to make sure things did not spiral. Instead, I took a breath and typed back a short response. What things? There was a pause that stretched longer than usual. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, phone in hand, recalibrating. When the reply came, it was carefully vague. Some paperwork. I cannot find a few things, and you always know where everything is. That was true. I had always known where everything was. I had always been the one to keep track, to organize, to remember dates and details that everyone else seemed to forget. It had made me useful. It had also made me invisible. I hesitated, then typed. What paperwork? Another pause. Then, it is not a big deal. I just need access to the files from a few years back. You helped me with them, remember? I did remember. Too well. The way she said helped always came with an unspoken expectation of continued loyalty. But something about the way she avoided specifics made my stomach tighten. I did not respond right away. I drove home, made dinner, sat at my small kitchen table with a plate of food growing cold while I thought. This was new territory. She was asking without commanding, needing without threatening. That alone told me something had shifted. When I finally replied, I kept it neutral. Which files? Her answer came faster this time. The account documents. The ones you set up for me when I was transitioning things after the move. Transitioning things. Another vague phrase. I pictured the manila folders in my old file box, the one I had kept when I moved out because it contained a mix of my own records and things she had asked me to hold onto for safekeeping. I had not looked at that box in years. I told her I would check what I had and get back to her. She sent a thumbs up. No thank you. No apology for Easter. Just expectation. After dinner, I pulled the box out from the back of my closet. Dust puffed up as I set it on the floor, and I knelt there for a moment, hand resting on the lid, feeling like I was standing at the edge of something I had avoided on purpose. I told myself not to read into it. I told myself I was not looking for dirt or leverage. I was just responding to a request. The folders inside were exactly as I remembered, labeled in my handwriting from years ago. Utilities, insurance, taxes, MISC. It was the MISC folder that gave me pause. Inside were copies of bank statements, forms, correspondence I had printed for her because she did not like dealing with anything that required patience. I flipped through them slowly, my heartbeat picking up without me realizing it. At first, nothing jumped out. Numbers, dates, account names. Then I noticed something small. An account I did not recognize, listed alongside others I knew well. I frowned and flipped back a page, then forward again. The account number appeared more than once, over multiple months. The balance was not enormous, but it was consistent. I tried to remember her mentioning it. I could not. I sat back on my heels, folder in my hands, and felt that uneasy sensation again, the one that had been following me since Easter. The sense that there was more beneath the surface. I almost put the folder away, almost told myself it was none of my business. Old instincts tugged at me, the reflex to minimize, to trust, to avoid being accused of snooping. Instead, I kept reading. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this was not a one-off. It was an account that had been active for years, quietly accumulating and distributing funds. It was not illegal or shocking on its face. What unsettled me was not the existence of the account, but the secrecy of it. The way it had never been mentioned, even when money had supposedly been tight. I thought back to all the times she had called me in tears about finances, about stress, about how much she was sacrificing. I thought about the money she had borrowed from me and never repaid, the guilt she had laid on me when I asked about it. My mouth went dry. I told myself to slow down, to not jump to conclusions. There could be explanations. There were always explanations. That was what I had told myself for years. I pulled out my laptop and set it on the coffee table, opening it with hands that felt slightly numb. I logged into my email and searched for old messages from her around the time those statements were dated. They were all there. requests for help, complaints about bills, messages framed as emergencies. None of them mentioned this account. The pieces did not line up. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. This was not about catching her in a lie. It was about understanding why I had been kept so busy managing her chaos. Because if I had been looking at this, if I had been asking the right questions, the story would not have held. My phone buzzed again, making me jump. "Any luck?" she wrote. I stared at the message, then at the folder in my lap. My heart was pounding now, not with fear exactly, but with something sharper, clearer. I typed slowly. "I am looking. I will need a little time." Her reply came almost immediately. "Why? It should be straightforward." Straightforward? The word made me want to laugh. I pictured her impatience, the way she disliked not being in control of the timeline. I did not respond. Instead, I took photos of the relevant documents and saved them to a secure folder on my computer. I did not know yet what I would do with them. I only knew I did not want to lose them. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was spiraling, but because my mind was working through something new. For the first time, my mother's behavior made sense in a way it never had before. If I was the problem, then no one would look too closely at. I woke up the next morning with the strange sensation that I was holding my breath even in my sleep. The realization from the night before had not faded. It had settled into me, heavy and quiet, like a weight I could not put down once I picked it up. I did not rush for my phone. I did not replay messages in my head. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, and made a decision that felt small but dangerous. I was not going to explain myself anymore. That thought did not arrive with confidence or relief. It came with fear. Explaining myself had been my armor for so long that the idea of putting it down felt like standing naked in a room full of people waiting to judge me. But I could feel it clearly now. Every explanation I gave only fed the story that I was the one who needed correcting. I got up, showered, dressed, moved through my morning routine with deliberate slowness. When I checked my phone, there were already messages waiting. My mother had sent another text late the night before asking if I had found the files. There was a follow-up from Paige asking if I was okay, and reminding me again that Mom was worried. Tyler had sent a short message that just said, "Call me when you can." In the past, I would have felt the pressure stack up in my chest. I would have started responding automatically, crafting careful sentences meant to soothe and reassure and minimize. Instead, I set the phone down and poured myself a cup of coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen counter, watching steam curl upward, grounding myself in the simple fact that I did not owe anyone immediate access to me. That realization alone felt like rebellion. At work, I kept my head down. I answered questions. I finished tasks. I smiled when necessary. I did not check my phone between meetings the way I usually did when family tension crept in. Each time the urge rose, I noticed it and let it pass, like a wave I did not have to ride. By lunchtime, the messages had multiplied. From my mother, from Paige, from my aunt again, who seemed to have appointed herself a messenger for peace. The language shifted as the hours passed. What started as concern hardened into irritation. "Why are you being so distant? This is not how families handle conflict. You are making things worse by shutting everyone out." I read them without responding, my stomach tight, my hands cold. The silence was doing something I had not expected. It was making them uncomfortable. That afternoon, Paige called me 3 times in a row. I watched the phone light up on my desk, my name reflected faintly in the black screen. Coworkers walked past. A printer hummed nearby. Life went on. When I finally stepped outside for air, I returned the call. Her voice cracked the moment I said hello. "Erin, "What is going on with you?" she asked. "You are scaring everyone. Scaring everyone." The words sat between us. "I am taking space," I said calmly. "From your family," she shot back. "From Mom." "From the situation," I said, "from being blamed for it." She sighed hard, the sound sharp with frustration. "You cannot just disappear. Mom is beside herself. She keeps saying she does not understand why you are doing this to her." Doing this to her. I leaned against the brick wall outside my building and closed my eyes. The old instinct flared, the one that wanted to soothe, to explain, to say, "I am not doing anything to you, I am just hurt." I felt it rising like a reflex in my throat. Instead, I said nothing. Paige filled the silence quickly. "Erin, please, say something. If you do not talk, she is just going to assume the worst." I thought about that, about how often silence had been used against me, about how often I had been told that my quiet was proof of guilt. "I am not assuming responsibility for her assumptions anymore," I said. There was a long pause. When Paige spoke again, her voice had shifted. "You are being really cold," she said. "This is not like you." That stung more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how thoroughly my role had been defined. Warm meant compliant. Cold meant not fixing things. We ended the call awkwardly, with her saying she hoped I would change my mind and me saying I needed to get back to work. I stood there for a moment afterward, letting the sun hit my face, feeling the tremor in my hands slowly ease. I had not defended myself. I had not apologized. The world had not ended. That evening, my mother tried a different tactic. Her text came in measured and careful, the kind of tone she used when she wanted to look reasonable. "I am worried about you, Erin. This distance is not healthy. We need to talk like adults. Avoiding me is not the answer." Avoiding. The word was a blade wrapped in velvet. I stared at the screen for a long time. The documents from the night before sat on my computer, their presence like a quiet witness in the room. I felt the urge to say something smart, something pointed, something that would let her know I was not blind anymore. I resisted it. I typed a single sentence. "I am not avoiding you. I am taking time." She did not reply for nearly an hour. When she did, the patience was gone. Time for what? To punish me. There it was. The shift. Concern replaced by accusation. I set the phone down and went to make dinner. Eating alone that night felt different than it had before. Not lonely exactly, but deliberate. I cooked something simple, sat at the table, and forced myself to stay present instead of mentally rehearsing arguments that might never happen. Later, I noticed my phone buzzing repeatedly from across the room. I did not rush to it. When I finally picked it up, there were several messages stacked together. From my mother. "I cannot believe you are doing this. After everything I have done for you. You are being selfish and cruel. You think you are better than this family now. If you do not call me tonight, do not bother calling me at all." The old panic surged, hot and fast. My heart pounded. My thoughts scattered. That last line was familiar. An ultimatum disguised as wounded pride. I sat down on the couch and pressed my feet into the floor, anchoring myself. I reminded myself of the file box, the hidden account, the years of pressure and guilt and misplaced responsibility. This was what silence did. It stripped away the polite layer and revealed what sat underneath. I did not respond. The next day, Tyler tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment unannounced in the early evening, knocking like he expected me to open the door immediately. I stood on the other side of it, heart racing, debating whether to pretend I was not home. But I knew that would only fuel the story. I took a breath and opened it. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, wearing that easy grin that usually softened everything. It did not reach his eyes this time. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around my living room like he was taking inventory, then sat on the edge of the couch. "Mom is losing it," he said. "You cannot just cut her off like this." I did not say anything. He frowned. "Say something, Aaron. This is ridiculous." I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "I am not cutting her off," I said. "I am not engaging right now." He let out a short laugh. "That is the same thing." "No, it is not," I said quietly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You have always done this, you know. You get upset, you pull away, and then everything gets worse." I felt a spark of anger, sharp and clear. I met his gaze. "Everything gets worse for who?" He blinked. "What?" "For who, Tyler?" I repeated. "For me? Or for her?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "You are making it hard on everyone." I almost smiled at that. There it was again. Everyone. A word so big it erased individuals completely. "I am not responsible for managing everyone's emotions," I said. He shook his head. "You sound like her therapist." I did not rise to the bait. He shifted in his seat, frustration creeping into his voice. "She thinks you are trying to hurt her. She thinks you are doing this on purpose." I let the silence stretch between us. I watched him squirm in it, uncomfortable without my usual reassurance. Finally, he stood up. "I do not get you," he said. "I really do not." I walked him to the door. "Maybe you do not have to," I said. After he left, my apartment felt smaller, but clearer. I could feel the cost of my choice pressing in. Being misunderstood hurt. Being painted as cold hurt. But something else was happening underneath that pain. They were adjusting. Over the next few days, I noticed the shift. Messages came less frequently. The tone wavered between anger and uncertainty. My mother checked in through other people instead of directly, sending feelers, testing reactions. At one point, Paige texted me that Mom was thinking about seeing a counselor and wanted to know if that would make me talk to her again. I read the message twice, then set it down without replying. Not because it was not significant, but because I refused to be baited into a conversation framed around her effort and my obligation. The hardest part was sitting with the false version of me spreading quietly through the family. The idea that I was sulking, that I was punishing, that I was dramatic and withholding. There were moments late at night when I almost broke, when I drafted long messages in my notes app, explaining everything, laying out the patterns, the documents, the truth I was only beginning to understand. I deleted every one of them, because I knew something now that I had not known before. Explanation was not the currency here, compliance was, and silence was the only thing I had that disrupted the transaction. One evening, as I sat on my couch scrolling mindlessly, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother that made my breath catch. "I need you to send those files tonight," she wrote. "This is important. No greeting, no concern, just urgency." I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking together. Her patience had worn thin. She needed something, and my silence was standing in the way. I typed back slowly. "I am still reviewing them." Her response came fast. "Reviewing what?" "Aaron, stop making this difficult." There it was. The slip. The irritation. The assumption that I existed to smooth her path. I did not reply. I set the phone down. My pulse steady now. My mind clear. For the first time, I could see the shape of the power dynamic shifting. Not because I had shouted or accused or exposed anything, but because I had stopped defending myself. And in that space where my explanations used to be, something else was emerging. Unease. For them. Control slipping. I sat there in the quiet, feeling the weight of what I was holding, knowing that staying silent was not passive at all. It was a choice, a strategy. And I could feel, in the pit of my stomach, that the longer I held my ground, the more carelessly they would move. That was the danger. And also, the opportunity. I turned off my phone for the night and went to bed, aware that whatever came next would not be subtle. Silence had done its work. Now it was waiting to see what they would do when they thought I was gone. For the next few days, I let my phone stay mostly dark, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I needed to see what happened when I was not available to absorb the tension. I answered work calls. I checked in with friends. I showed up for my own life. With my family, I stayed quiet, short when I had to be, polite when it mattered, and otherwise out of reach. From the outside, it probably looked like I was fading away. That is what my mother liked people to believe. If I did not respond, it meant I was sulking. If I did not show up, it meant I was punishing. If I stayed quiet, it meant I had nothing real to say. I could almost feel her settling into that assumption, the way she always did after she delivered a blow. She would wait for me to come back, and if I did not, she would tell herself I was being stubborn until I cracked. This time, I did not crack. By the end of that week, the tone of the messages shifted. They stopped being furious and started being practical. Less emotion, more expectation. My mother sent one that just said, "Are you going to send those files or not?" Tyler texted, "Just send her what she needs. This is getting ridiculous." Paige sent a tired, careful message. "Mom is stressed. Please do not make this harder." What none of them understood was that the harder I made it, the more honest they became. On Saturday morning, I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard a knock at my door. It was sharp, impatient, like whoever it was expected me to answer. I froze for a second, towel in my hands, then walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was my Aunt Linda. My first instinct was to pretend I was not home. Then I remembered how easily silence could be twisted and how quickly she would carry that version back to my mother. I opened the door. She smiled too brightly, like she was performing concern. "There you are," she said, stepping in before I could even invite her. "I was in the neighborhood and I thought I would check on you." She smelled like perfume and the peppermint gum she always chewed. She walked into my living room, glancing around as if she was taking inventory, then turned to face me with her hands clasped. "Your mother is worried sick," she said. I waited. I had learned not to fill silences for other people. Linda's smile faltered a little. She shifted into the tone adults use with children. "Aaron, you cannot just disappear from your family. It is not fair." Not fair. I almost laughed. She pointed at me at Easter and told me I was the reason this family is always falling apart. I said quietly. Then she told me to leave. So I did. Linda blinked, lips parting as if she had not expected me to say it so plainly. "Well," she said, "you know your mother. She gets emotional. She does not always choose her words well. But she loves you." She did not say, "That was wrong." She did not say, "She should apologize." She skipped straight to love, like love erased impact. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me," she said, "you are making this very difficult for her right now." "Difficult how?" I asked. Linda hesitated, then smiled again, smaller this time. "There are just some things she is trying to handle," she said. "It is a lot. You have always been good at helping her with the paperwork and the details. She is overwhelmed." I felt something in me go still. Paperwork, details, handle. It was the same language my mother had used. "What things?" I asked. Linda waved a hand as if it was nothing. "You know, house stuff, accounts, planning. Your mother likes to have everything organized. She likes to feel prepared." "Prepared for what?" I asked. Linda's eyes flicked away. "Aaron," she said with a soft sigh. You do not need to interrogate me. I am just saying, she needs you to stop being stubborn and send what she asked for. There it was. Stubborn. Not cautious. Not hurt. Not protecting myself. Stubborn. Like a mule that needed correcting. I took a breath. I am not sending anything until I understand what I am sending and why, I said. Linda's expression tightened. That is not like you, she said. I did not answer. She let out a quiet, frustrated sound and changed tactics. Your mother has done so much for you, she said. She raised you. She sacrificed. She kept this family together. You do not want to be the one who breaks her now, do you? The words landed like a familiar weight, guilt dressed up as morality. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I had not let myself see before. Linda was not here because she cared about my feelings. Linda was here because my mother had sent her to push the right buttons. I walked to my kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady. When I turned back, I said, if my mother needs help, she can tell me exactly what she needs and why. Not send you to pressure me. Linda's face flushed. She is your mother, she snapped. Do you hear yourself? You sound cold. I set the glass down carefully. I am calm, I said. Those are different things. Linda stared at me for a beat, then grabbed her purse. Fine, she said. I tried. But do not act surprised when this causes lasting damage. She left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet of my apartment settle back into place. My heart was beating a little faster now, but not with fear, with recognition. They were scrambling. That afternoon, I pulled the file box back out. I laid everything on my dining table like I was setting up a case for myself. Not because I was planning a lawsuit or some dramatic confrontation, but because I needed to see it clearly. In the past, I would have trusted my mother's word and handed over whatever she requested. Now, I wanted facts. I started with what I had already noticed, the unfamiliar account and the consistent transfers. Then I went further. I looked at the dates, the amounts, the names on the documents, the addresses. Most of it still looked ordinary enough to hide in plain sight. Then I saw my name. Not as the account holder, not as a beneficiary, but as a contact on an old form, my phone number listed next to my mother's in a section labeled Authorized. My stomach tightened. Authorized for what? I whispered to myself. I flipped through again, slower. There were pages I had never paid attention to because I had been young and trusting and exhausted by her constant crises. There were signatures. Some were hers. Some were typed. Some were initials. And then I saw something that made my breath catch. A line with my full name, not my nickname, not Erin, my legal name, and a space for a signature next to it. It was not signed, but it was there. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. A memory surfaced, not a full flashback, just a sensation. My mother sitting beside me at a table years ago, pushing papers toward me and saying, "Just sign here. It is nothing. It is just for the account. It makes things easier. You trust me, right?" I had been so used to signing whatever she put in front of me, school forms, rental documents, bank things, because she framed it as help and family and responsibility. I had never thought to slow down long enough to ask why my name needed to be anywhere near her finances. I stood up abruptly, chair legs scraping. My hands were cold. I knew what I needed to do, and I hated it. I needed to check my credit. The thought alone made me feel sick. Not because I wanted to believe she would do something truly harmful, but because the possibility meant my childhood instincts had been wrong in a way I was not ready to admit. I opened my laptop and pulled up a credit monitoring site I had used once years ago when I was renting an apartment. I logged in, reset a password, waited for the spinning circle to stop. When the report loaded, my eyes scanned down the list of accounts and inquiries. Most of it was normal. Student loans, my car, my credit card. Then, near the middle, I saw an inquiry from a lender I did not recognize, dated just a few months ago. My throat went dry. I clicked into details. A second inquiry from another lender. Same time frame. And then, tucked under accounts, a line that did not belong. A home equity line of credit. My hands started shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. A home equity line of credit in my name, opened last year. I did not own a house. I sat down hard. The room tilted slightly like my brain was trying to reject what it was seeing. No, I whispered. No. I clicked again, thinking it was a glitch, a mistake, a misreport. The details remained: the lender, the opening date, the balance, the payment history. There were payments being made, regular ones, not missed, not delinquent. Which meant whoever opened it was making sure it stayed clean. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to find one that did not make my mother the center of it. Identity theft by a stranger, a clerical error, fraud by someone unrelated. But the connection was right there in my own file box, the papers she wanted, the urgency, the pressure, the careful language about handling things. I sat there staring at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears, and I realized something awful and clear. She had not been panicking because I hurt her feelings. She had been panicking because I was no longer reachable, and if she needed something from me, something tied to my name, she could not afford for me to stay quiet. I forced myself to breathe, in through my nose, out through my mouth, slow, steady. I did not let myself spiral into a full breakdown because I needed to think. I grabbed my phone and opened my recent messages with her. I scrolled through the last week, the demands, the guilt, the urgency about files. I looked for anything that hinted at the truth. There was nothing direct. Of course there was not. She never said the real thing. She used other words, softer words, words that sounded like family, paperwork, things, handle, important. The rage that rose in me was not hot and explosive. It was cold. It was the kind that makes your vision sharpen. I thought about Easter again, the way she had pointed at me and made me the cause of everything falling apart. I saw it differently now. She had been controlling the room. She had been controlling the story. She had been reminding everyone who held power. And the moment I walked away, she lost a piece of that power. A knock came again, softer this time. I jumped, heart hammering, then checked the peephole. It was Tyler. I did not open the door right away. I stood there, hand on the knob, weighing choices. Part of me wanted to drag him inside and shove the laptop in his face. Look, I wanted to say. Look what she did. Look what she is hiding. But I was not ready to show my cards. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, keeping it half closed behind me. What? Tyler asked, sounding impatient. Why are you acting like this? Mom says you are refusing to help her with something important. Something important, I repeated, keeping my voice even. Yeah, he said. She needs those files, Aaron. Just send them. This is ridiculous. I studied his face. He looked annoyed, not worried. He looked like someone who wanted the tension gone, not someone who wanted the truth. Why does she need them so badly? I asked. Tyler shrugged. I do not know. She said it is house stuff, account stuff. She said you are being difficult. Difficult. Again. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. I will handle it. Tyler blinked, surprised. That is it? You will just do it? I kept my expression neutral. I said I would handle it, I repeated. He exhaled, relieved. Thank you, he said. Seriously. Mom is on edge. He turned to leave, then paused. Also, he added, kind of awkwardly, she mentioned something about needing you to sign something soon, like a quick thing. She said not to worry, it is just a form. My stomach clenched hard enough to make me dizzy. A quick thing. Just a form. You trust me, right? I kept my face still. Sign something, I said. Yeah, Tyler said. She said she will explain. Just do not freak out, okay? He left before I could say anything else. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. My hands were shaking again, but I forced myself to stand upright and breathe through it. Now I knew what was coming. A signature request. A paper pushed across a table. A story about why it was necessary. A push for speed, for trust, for compliance. And now I understood why they thought I was walking away. Because if they could convince themselves I was gone, they could move without watching their steps. They could get careless. They could assume I would not notice until it was too late. I went back to my laptop and took screenshots of the credit report, the account details, the inquiries. I saved them alongside the photos of the documents from my file box. Then I opened a new note and started writing down dates, lenders, balances, anything that could matter later. I was not sure yet whether I would go to a lawyer or a bank or the police. The thought alone made my stomach churn. This was my mother, the woman who packed my lunches, who braided my hair, who hugged me for photos. But this was also the woman who pointed at me on Easter and called me the reason our family was falling apart, and who now, apparently, had a line of credit tied to my name. The betrayal was so deep it felt unreal. And yet, under that betrayal, something else was emerging. Clarity. If she could do this, if she could use my name as a tool, then everything made sense. The constant guilt, the pressure to comply, the need to keep me in the role of the emotional problem. As long as I was busy proving I was not dramatic, I was not looking at paperwork. As long as I was apologizing, I was not asking questions. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall for a long time, letting the reality settle into place. My phone sat beside me, silent for the moment, like even it was holding its breath. I knew I could not keep this entirely to myself. If I tried, she would corner me, she would isolate me, she would make me feel crazy until I signed whatever she put in front of me. But I also knew I had to choose the right person, the right moment, the right words. By evening, I had made up my mind. I picked up my phone and hovered over Paige's name. My thumb trembled. Paige was careful, loyal, exhausted. She was also smart, and she hated being lied to, even if she pretended she did not. I did not call yet. I just held the phone, breathing slowly, listening to my own heartbeat, deciding how to crack this open without letting my mother slam it shut again. Outside my window, the sky darkened into a soft gray. Streetlights flickered on. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary night. And in my living room, with my laptop open to proof I never wanted to find, I understood something that made my skin go cold. They had stopped watching me. And that was exactly why the truth was finally within reach. The first sign that something had shifted came in a way so small I almost missed it. Paige texted me late the next morning, not with instructions or guilt, but with a question. Did Mom ever talk to you about opening anything in your name? I stared at the screen, my pulse jumping, then settling into a slow, steady beat. That question would not have existed a week ago. A week ago, Paige would have told me I was imagining things, that Mom would never do that, that I was overthinking again. I did not answer right away. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee growing cold, letting the weight of the moment settle. This was exactly why I had stayed quiet. Silence had made room for doubt. Doubt had made room for questions. "What do you mean?" I typed finally. There was a pause, longer than usual. Then the dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "She asked me something weird last night," Paige wrote, "about whether I remembered signing something years ago. She said it was probably nothing, but it did not feel like nothing." I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. I thought about the half-signed forms, the credit report, the home equity line of credit that should not exist. "She never mentioned it to me," I typed. "What did she say?" Another pause. "She said she was just trying to get everything organized," Paige wrote. "She said you have been acting strange and she is worried you are confused about things. She asked if I would help calm you down." Calm you down. There it was again. The familiar framing. The suggestion that if there was a problem, it lived in my head. I felt a flicker of anger, but I did not let it take over. This was not the moment to unload everything. This was the moment to let the truth move on its own. "Can I call you later?" I typed. "I think there are things you should see, not hear secondhand." The reply came almost immediately. "Yes, please." That one word told me more than any argument ever had. I spent the rest of the morning preparing, not like I was about to confront someone, but like I was about to tell a story that needed to be precise. I laid out the documents again, this time with Paige in mind. Not the accusation, not the betrayal, just the facts. I took screenshots of the credit report. I organized the bank statements by date. I pulled up the form with my name listed as authorized and took a close-up photo of the unsigned line. I labeled everything carefully. This was not about proving my mother was a villain. It was about showing that something was wrong. When Paige called that afternoon, her voice sounded tight, controlled, like she was bracing herself. I put the phone on speaker and sat on the edge of my couch. "Hey," she said. "I have been thinking about what you said." I did not say anything. I let her continue. "Mom is really upset," Paige said. "She keeps saying you are trying to hurt her, that you are digging for reasons to pull away. She says you have always been sensitive about money." I closed my eyes. "I am not digging," I said calmly. "I found something because she asked me for files and rushed me." There was a pause. "What did you find?" Paige asked. I opened my laptop and took a breath. "I am going to send you a few screenshots," I said. "I just want you to look at them before you respond." "Okay," she said quietly. I sent the first image, the credit report line showing the home equity account. Then the date. Then the lender. There was silence on the line. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. "Paige," I said softly. "I am here," she said. Her voice sounded different now, thinner, less sure. "Erin, you do not own a house." "No," I said. "I do not." Another long silence. "She would not do that," Paige said finally. "She would not open something in your name." I did not argue. I sent the next screenshot. The form with my name listed as authorized. The date. The file box photo. "I am not saying she intended to hurt me," I said carefully. "I am saying this exists, and I did not know about it." Paige exhaled sharply. I can hear her breathing through the phone. "She told me she was handling everything herself," Paige said. "She said she did not want to burden us." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She never wants to burden anyone," I said. "She wants control." That word hung between us. Paige did not respond right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "She asked me if I remembered signing something years ago," Paige said. "She said it was for convenience." I told her I did not remember. She got defensive. "That tracks," I said gently. There was a sound on the line, like Paige rubbing her forehead. Why would she do this? Paige asked. Why not just ask? I thought about Easter, about the pointing finger, about the years of blame. Because asking requires consent, I said. Control does not. The call ended shortly after that. Not with resolution, not with agreement, but with something far more dangerous to my mother. Doubt. The ripple did not stop with Paige. The next day, Tyler texted me something that made my stomach flip. Mom is acting weird. Did you say something to Paige? I stared at the message, then typed back carefully. I showed her documents Mom asked me to send. There was no immediate reply. An hour later, my phone rang. Tyler this time. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. What did you do? He asked, not greeting, not checking in. His voice was sharp, unsettled. I showed Paige paperwork Mom asked me to handle, I said. That is all. That is not all. He snapped. She is asking questions now. She is asking me questions. Good. I said quietly. Tyler went silent. Then he laughed, but it was hollow. You always do this, he said. You stir things up, and then act calm about it. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I am not stirring anything, I said. I am not telling stories. I am answering questions with documents. He swore under his breath. Mom is freaking out, he said. She says you are trying to turn everyone against her. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. I am not turning anyone against her, I said. I am not asking anyone to take sides. I am just not covering for things I do not understand. Tyler was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. She asked me if I remembered signing anything, he said. She said she needed us all to be on the same page. Same page. I thought about how often that phrase had been used to mean, do not contradict her. Did you sign anything? I asked. No, Tyler said. I told her I did not remember. She got angry. I closed my eyes. The pieces were moving now, shifting into place without my pushing them. She told me you are being dramatic, Tyler added, that you are reading into things. I smiled sadly. Of course she did. What do you think? I asked him. There was a long pause. I do not know, he said finally. But something feels off. That was enough. Over the next few days, the family dynamic changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Messages became shorter, more cautious. Conversations that once flowed through my mother now happened without her. Paige asked me questions directly instead of translating through Mom. Tyler stopped telling me to just smooth things over, and my mother felt it. She started calling more frequently, leaving voicemails when I did not answer. Her tone shifted wildly. One message was tearful, talking about how alone she felt. The next was sharp, accusing me of poisoning my siblings against her. I did not respond. The power shift was not loud. It was quiet and deeply unsettling, especially for someone who had relied on being the unquestioned center of everything. One evening, my Aunt Linda called me again. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was strained. Your mother is very upset, she said. She feels betrayed. She says you are airing private matters that do not concern anyone else. I deleted it without replying. Later that night, Paige texted me again. Mom says we need to have a family conversation, she wrote. All of us. She wants to clear the air. I read the message twice. My heart beat faster, but not with fear this time, with readiness. About what? I asked. She says there have been misunderstandings, Paige replied. She says we should talk before things get out of hand. Out of hand. The phrase made me smile faintly. I typed back. I am open to a conversation, I wrote, as long as it is honest. Paige took a while to respond. Okay, she finally wrote. I think it needs to happen. I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the dim ceiling light. I thought about how different this felt from every other family crisis I had lived through. Before, I had been the one begging for conversation, for clarity, for acknowledgement. Now the request was coming from her. And not because she wanted to understand me, because she was losing control of the story. I could feel the weight of the next step pressing in. A group conversation meant exposure. It meant my mother would perform, deflect, cry, accuse. It meant she would try to put me back in my place in front of an audience. But it also meant something else. She would not be able to do it in private. I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents one more time, not with anger, but with a strange sense of calm. I was not planning an ambush. I was preparing to tell the truth without dressing it up or watering it down. I thought about Easter again, the moment she pointed at me and made me the reason everything was falling apart. I could see now how desperate that move had been, a public strike meant to reinforce her authority. It had backfired. I went to bed that night knowing the calm would not last, knowing the next chapter would not be quiet or subtle, knowing that once the truth had changed sides, it would not quietly go back where it came from. Whatever came next would happen in the open, and this time, I would not be standing alone at the table. We scheduled the call for Sunday afternoon, the time my mother always preferred, because it gave her the whole morning to work herself into whatever emotional shape she wanted to present. I spent the hours before it doing ordinary things on purpose. I cleaned my kitchen. I watered my plants. I took a walk around the block and felt the sun on my face, reminding myself that no matter what happened on that screen, my body was still mine, my life still intact. When the time came, I set my laptop on the dining table and sat down with a glass of water beside me. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had imagined nerves, dread, that familiar knot of panic. Instead, there was a quiet alertness, like I was stepping into a room I had been avoiding for years and finally turning on the light. Paige joined first. Her face appeared on the screen, tight smile, eyes already tired. She nodded at me, a small acknowledgement that felt like solidarity. Tyler joined next, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw set. He looked like someone bracing for impact. Then my mother appeared. She had positioned herself carefully, I could tell. Soft lighting, neutral background, hair brushed, makeup just enough to look composed but vulnerable. The version of herself she liked the world to see. She smiled when she saw us, the smile she used at church or with neighbors. "There you are," she said lightly. "I am glad we could all get together. This has been weighing on my heart." No one responded right away. She glanced around the screen, her eyes flicking from face to face. The smile tightened. "I asked for this call because I feel like things have gotten very out of hand," she continued. "There has been a lot of confusion, and I think it is important we clear the air before more damage is done." Damage. The word hung there. Paige shifted in her seat. "Mom," she said carefully, "I think Aaron should talk first." My mother's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Oh," she said. "Well, if Aaron wants to." She looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing whether I would flinch. I did not. I took a breath and spoke slowly. "This is not about confusion," I said. "This is about patterns and facts. And I am not here to argue. I am here to explain why I stepped back and why I cannot pretend everything is fine anymore." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, nodding as if she was being generous. "Go on," she said. I felt the old pressure to rush, to justify, to soften my words. I resisted it. "At Easter," I said, "you pointed at me and said I was the reason this family is always falling apart. Then you told me to leave if I could not handle the truth. I left. That was not confusion. That was a boundary." She sighed dramatically. "Aaron," she said, You are still stuck on that. I was being honest. Someone had to say what everyone was thinking. Tyler shifted. Mom, he said, maybe that was not the best. She cut him off with a raised hand. Let me finish. Erin has always taken things too personally. I did not mean she was the only problem. I meant her behavior affects the family. I looked at her calmly. That is not what you said, I replied. And even if it were, public humiliation is not honesty. It is control. Her eyes flashed. Control, she repeated. That is a very strong word. It fits, I said. Paige inhaled sharply. My mother leaned closer to the camera, her voice lowering. I do not know who has been putting these ideas in your head, Erin, but this is not healthy. Turning your siblings against me, accusing me of things. This is not you. I felt a familiar urge to defend myself, to say I am not turning anyone against you. Instead, I said something else. I did not turn anyone against you. I answered questions with documents when they were asked. The shift was immediate. Her face changed, the softness cracking. What documents? She asked. Paige straightened. The financial ones? She said. The ones you asked Erin to send. My mother blinked, then laughed lightly. Those, she said. That is what all this is about. I asked Erin to help me organize some paperwork, and suddenly I am being treated like a criminal. No one said criminal, Tyler muttered. She ignored him. Erin has always liked to dig, she continued. She fixates on things. She sees problems where there are none. I opened my laptop and shared my screen. This, I said evenly, is my credit report. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then away. You should not be sharing that, she said sharply. That is private. It is my private information, I said, and this account should not exist. Paige leaned closer to her screen. Oh my God, she whispered. Tyler stared, his expression draining of color. What is that? He asked. A home equity line of credit, I said. In my name. Opened last year. Silence fell. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind that presses on your chest. My mother recovered first. That is a mistake, she said quickly. There are errors on credit reports all the time. You are overreacting. I clicked to the next document. This is a form from your files, I said. My name is listed as authorized. There is a signature line for me. Paige shook her head slowly. Mom, she said. What is this? My mother's voice rose. This is ridiculous. Erin helped me with paperwork years ago. She must be confused. I never did anything without her consent. I looked directly into the camera. I did not consent, I said. And you have been asking me for files and signatures again. Urgently. Without explaining why. Her mouth tightened. I was trying to protect you, she snapped. If I had told you everything, you would have panicked like you are doing now. Protect me from what? I asked. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then she leaned back, crossing her arms. From stress, she said. From worrying about things you do not understand. That was the moment. The one where the performance cracked. Paige spoke, her voice shaking. You asked me if I remembered signing something, she said. You asked Tyler too. Why? My mother's eyes darted. I was making sure we were all on the same page, she said. Families help each other. I did not think it would turn into this. Turn into what? Tyler asked quietly. You using Erin's name? She slammed her hand on the table, the sound sharp even through the screen. I did not use her, she shouted. I did what I had to do to keep this family afloat. You all think things just happen on their own. Someone has to manage everything. Manage by lying, I said. She stared at me, breathing hard. After everything I have done for you, she said, This is how you repay me. You humiliate me in front of my own children. I did not raise my voice. I am not humiliating you, I said. I am telling the truth. There is a difference. Paige wiped at her eyes. Mom, she said, why did you not just ask for help? Because you would have said no, my mother shot back. You would have questioned me. Erin always questions me. She always thinks she knows better. I felt something settle in my chest. There it is, I said softly. That is why I am always the problem. Because I ask questions. She laughed bitterly. You make everything about you. Tyler leaned forward. No, he said. You make it about her. Every time something goes wrong, it is Erin. Every time something is uncomfortable, it is Erin being dramatic. And now this. He gestured at the screen. This is not nothing. My mother looked at him like he had betrayed her. So now you are taking her side too, she said. After all I have done for you. This is not sides, Paige said. This is facts. The room went quiet again. I could see my mother recalculating, her eyes narrowing, her mouth pressing into a thin line. She had lost control of the narrative, and she knew it. Fine, she said coldly. If that is how you all feel, then I guess I am just a terrible mother. I guess I sacrificed everything for nothing. No one rushed to comfort her. That silence was louder than any accusation. After a moment she spoke again, her voice trembling now. Are you happy, Erin? Is this what you wanted? To tear this family apart? I met her gaze. You told me I was the reason this family was falling apart, I said. All I did was stop holding it together for you. She stared at me, stunned. Paige took a deep breath. We need to pause this, she said. This is too much. My mother scoffed. Of course you would say that, she snapped. Run away when things get hard. I stood up, pushing my chair back gently. I am not running, I said. I am stepping back. There will be consequences for using my name and my credit without my consent. I am giving you the chance to address this properly. Her eyes widened. Are you threatening me? I shook my head. I am protecting myself. The call ended shortly after that. Not with resolution, not with apologies. My mother disconnected abruptly, her square disappearing from the screen. Paige and Tyler stayed on. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, Tyler exhaled. Damn, he said. Paige looked at me, tears in her eyes. I am so sorry, she whispered. I did not see it. I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. I did not want to be right like this, I said. I just wanted it to stop. It will not be the same after this, Paige said. I nodded. I know. We talked for a little while longer, about next steps, about freezing credit, about getting advice. Practical things. Grounding things. When the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet pressing in around me. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from my mother. You have crossed a line. Do not contact me until you are ready to apologize. I read it once, then set the phone down. The line had been crossed a long time ago. Now it was just visible to everyone. I stood at my window and looked out at the darkening street, my reflection faint in the glass. I felt shaken, but not broken. For the first time, the truth was not trapped inside me, and I knew the fallout was only beginning. By the next morning, the air felt different, not calmer, but thinner, like the room had lost oxygen overnight. I woke up before my alarm and lay there listening to the quiet, my mind replaying the call in fragments, my mother's hand slamming down out of frame, Paige's shaking voice, Tyler's stunned silence, the moment my mother's sweet mask cracked and she tried to pull it back on with guilt. I reached for my phone and immediately wished I had not. There were messages waiting, and they were already splitting into camps. From my mother, sent at 2 in the morning, a paragraph so long I could see the block of it before I even opened it. "You have humiliated me," it began. "You have poisoned your siblings. You have taken private family matters and turned them into an attack. If you want to destroy this family, you are doing a great job. Do not contact me until you are ready to apologize and stop spreading lies." I read it once, then set the phone down. My hands did not shake the way they would have months ago. I felt something else, a deep tiredness, like my body had been carrying her rage for years and finally put it down. Another message came in, this one from Paige. "I froze my credit," she wrote. "I am going to call the lender today. Tyler wants to talk later. Are you okay?" I stared at that last question. Are you okay? It was simple. It was direct. It was the first time in days anyone in my family had asked it without an agenda. I typed back. "I am not okay, but I am steady." Then Tyler called. His voice sounded rough, like he had not slept. "Erin," he said, "I am coming over. Is that okay?" I hesitated for a second, then said yes. When he arrived, he did not come in like he owned the space the way he had before. He stood by the door for a moment, looking uncertain, like he was stepping into a new version of our relationship. I handed him coffee. He took it with both hands and stared into the cup, as if the answer might be floating there. "I keep thinking about Mom saying she did what she had to do," he said finally. Like it was normal. I sat across from him, legs tucked under me. "It is not normal," I said. He nodded slowly. "I know. It is hard to accept. It feels like if I accept it, then everything I believed about her is wrong." His words hit me in a soft, unexpected way. That was the thing. This was not just about me being hurt. This was about all of us having to admit the person we centered our whole family around had been using us. "I am not asking you to hate her," I said. "I am asking you to see what she did." Tyler swallowed. He looked up at me. "What are you going to do?" I thought about that. I had spent the night after the call staring at my ceiling, thinking about lawyers and reports and consequences. But what I kept coming back to was something simpler. Control. If I went after her immediately with everything, she would make herself the martyr again. She would scream about betrayal and ungrateful children and sacrifice. She would drag in every aunt and cousin she could to build a wall of sympathy around herself. "I am going to protect myself first," I said. "Freeze my credit, document everything, talk to someone who understands this, legally. And I am going to stop letting her dictate how this gets told." Tyler nodded, relief and fear mixing in his eyes. "Paige said she wants another call," he said. "Like a real one. Not just the four of us. She thinks we should talk in person. In person would be a disaster. My mother would cry louder. She would throw her body into the performance. But another part of me understood why Paige wanted it. Face-to-face forces a different kind of truth." "I do not want to be alone with her," I said. "If we do anything, it has to be all of us." Tyler nodded. "Yeah, me neither." We sat in silence for a moment, letting that settle. Then Tyler's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. "What?" I asked. He held the screen out. "A message from our cousin Monica. Your mom called me crying," he said. "She says you guys are attacking her. She says Erin is spreading lies about financial stuff, and you both are letting her manipulate you. Are you okay? Manipulate you." That word. It was almost funny how she always flipped it. She was the puppeteer, but the moment we saw the strings, she accused me of being the one pulling them. Tyler's shoulders sagged. "She is already calling people," he said. "She is already doing the tour." I nodded. "I know." An hour later, my Aunt Linda texted me a Bible verse about honoring your mother. A neighbor I barely knew sent a message on social media saying she was praying for our family. Someone else commented on an old photo of my mother and me with a heart emoji. It was like watching a machine start up, gears turning, a familiar pattern rolling into place. My mother was not trying to fix what she had done. She was trying to control who believed what. Paige called around noon. I put her on speaker so Tyler could hear too. She is making calls, Paige said without preamble. She called Aunt Linda, Monica, Mrs. Klein, probably half the women from church. She is telling everyone you are having some kind of breakdown. She told Aunt Linda you are unstable and obsessed with money. Tyler swore again. Paige's voice shook. I did not realize how fast she would move, she said. She is scared. That word made my stomach tighten. Scared meant desperate. Desperate meant reckless. We need to be careful, I said. If she is this frantic, she might try to push papers at you, Tyler. Or you, Paige. Anything to clean it up. Paige went quiet. She already tried, she admitted. She texted me this morning asking me to sign something that would help simplify things. She said it was just a form to make it easier for her to manage accounts. I felt my skin go cold. What kind of form? I asked. I did not open it, Paige said. I got scared. I thought about what you said, and I did not open it. Good, I said firmly. Tyler exhaled. She asked me too, he said. She said she needs us united. She said if we just sign the same paperwork, everything can go back to normal. Normal? The word made me laugh, a low, bitter sound. She does not want normal, I said. She wants control. Paige's voice softened. So what do we do, Aaron? I stared at my hands for a moment, thinking. The idea of going to the police made my stomach twist. The idea of doing nothing made my skin crawl. I needed a middle ground that protected me and exposed the truth without turning into a public spectacle. We do a family meeting, I said. But not the way she wants it, not privately, not with her setting the agenda. All of us. Cameras on, calm, facts. Paige whispered. She is going to hate that. Yes, I said. That is the point. She cannot gaslight 3 people at once the way she can gaslight one. Tyler nodded. We should record it, he said. I hesitated. Legally, I did not know, but I understood the instinct. Evidence, accountability. At minimum, I said, we take notes. We keep everything in writing after. We stop accepting phone calls as the only version of reality. Paige breathed out slowly. Okay, she said. I will do it. The rest of that day was a blur of logistics. Tyler called Paige and me into a group chat so we could stay aligned. Paige shared that she had already started the process of freezing her credit and was preparing to contact the lender on my behalf because she knew I was drowning. Tyler offered to come with me if I needed to go to a bank in person. It felt surreal. Like we were suddenly teammates in a game we never asked to play. Then, around 6 that evening, my mother called me. I watched the screen light up. My stomach flipped, but I did not answer. A voicemail followed almost immediately. I listened with my phone pressed to my ear, standing in my kitchen. Her voice was different. Softer. Almost trembling. Aaron, she said, please. We need to talk. Not like this. Not with everyone. You are misunderstanding. You are making this bigger than it is. I am your mother. I love you. Please stop doing this. Please stop making me look like a monster. The last line was the real one. Not please forgive me. Not, I am sorry. Please stop making me look like a monster. I deleted the voicemail and sat down at my table, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The machine was running, and she was panicking because it was no longer working the way it used to. Paige texted me a few minutes later. She called me too, she wrote. She asked if I would talk you out of this. She told me you are always the one who overreacts. I stared at that, and felt something inside me sharpen. She was still trying to put me back in my role even now, even with evidence on the table. Tyler sent a message right after. "She is telling everyone you are unstable," he wrote. I told her to stop. She cried and said you are ruining her life. I sat there for a long moment, letting those words settle. Ruining her life. As if her life was the story everyone believed, and the truth was the threat. That night, Paige and Tyler and I got on another call, just the three of us. We talked about what we needed to say, how we needed to say it. Not emotional speeches, not accusations, clear statements. We want transparency. We want accountability. We want to know what is in Aaron's name and why. We want the truth in writing. We are not signing anything. We are not handling anything under pressure. Paige looked exhausted, but determined. Tyler looked angry, but focused. I looked at my own reflection in the corner of the screen, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she was sitting upright, not folded in on herself. At the end of the call, Paige said softly, "She is going to explode when we ask for this." I nodded. "I know." Tyler leaned back and rubbed his face. "She cannot keep doing this," he said. "She cannot keep using us." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She can if we let her," I said. "That is what changes now." After we hung up, I went to bed, but sleep would not come. My mind kept flashing through the pieces: Easter lunch, the hidden account, the credit line, the guilt, the pressure. It all lined up now like a map. And the most frightening part was how easy it had been for her to keep it hidden. Not through violence, not through threats, through emotion, through family obligation, through making me the problem so no one looked at her. By midnight, I had drafted a short message in our group chat, the kind of message I would have been terrified to send a month ago. "We do the meeting tomorrow night," I wrote. "All of us. Cameras on. No side conversations. No signing anything. If she refuses, we move forward without her cooperation." Paige replied first. "Okay." Tyler replied next. "I am in." I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. This was not a dramatic revenge. This was not a victory lap. This was a family splitting along fault lines that had been there for years, finally visible because the person who always absorbed the tremors had stepped away. Tomorrow, my mother would show up with her performance, her tears, her accusations. She would try to regain control. She would try to make us doubt ourselves again. But this time, she would not be facing me alone. And that was the difference between being the scapegoat and being a witness. I closed my eyes and let that thought settle like a steadying hand. Tomorrow, the story would be told in the open, whether she liked it or not. The meeting happened the next night, and it did not start the way my mother had planned, which I realized the moment she joined the call and saw all three of us already there, sitting upright, cameras on, faces calm. There was a flicker in her eyes, surprise first, then calculation, like a chess player realizing the board had changed while she was not looking. She smiled anyway. She always smiled first. "So," she said lightly, "here we all are. I am glad you finally decided to talk, Aaron." I did not respond. Neither did Paige or Tyler. The silence stretched, not awkward, just firm. My mother cleared her throat and adjusted her posture. "I want to start by saying how hurt I am," she continued. "I never imagined my own children would treat me like this. I feel attacked and misunderstood. And I think a lot of this has spiraled out of control." Paige leaned forward slightly. "Mom," she said, "we did not get on this call to talk about your feelings first." My mother's smile twitched. "Excuse me. We got on this call to talk about facts," Paige said, "about what is in Aaron's name and why." There it was, the first crack. My mother sighed deeply, the way she always did when she wanted to look tired but noble. I do not understand why this has become such a witch hunt, she said. Families help each other. I did what I had to do to keep things stable. Tyler spoke up before I could. You used Erin's credit, he said, without telling her. That is not helping. That is crossing a line. Her eyes snapped to him. I did not use her, she said sharply. I managed things. Someone had to. I felt my heartbeat steady instead of spike. That surprised me. I had expected fear. Instead, I felt clarity. You managed things by opening a line of credit in my name, I said. By listing me as authorized on accounts I did not know existed. By asking me to sign paperwork without explanation. Those are facts. She laughed, short and bitter. You are making it sound so sinister. It is sinister, Paige said quietly. My mother stared at her, wounded outrage flashing across her face. How can you say that to me? Because I have seen the documents, Paige replied. And because you asked me to sign something too. That was the moment my mother lost her footing. Her voice rose, sharp with panic. I asked you because I trust you, she snapped, because I needed help. And instead of helping, you all ganged up on me like I am some criminal. No one is calling you a criminal, Tyler said. But this is not nothing. She turned on him. You always let Erin poison you against me, she said. Ever since you were kids. She has always been jealous. Always needed attention. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but it did not control me this time. This is exactly what I mean, I said. The moment you feel challenged, you make me the problem. You have done it my whole life. She scoffed. Oh, please. You are rewriting history. I am remembering it, I said. There is a difference. The room went quiet. I could hear my own breathing. I am not here to punish you, I continued. I am here to protect myself. I am freezing my credit. I am documenting everything. And unless this is addressed properly, I will take the next steps necessary to untangle my name from whatever you attached it to. Her face drained of color. You would do that to your own mother, she whispered. I met her gaze. You did this to me first. She shook her head, tears welling now, the performance shifting. I gave up everything for you, she said. I stayed when your father left. I sacrificed my life. And now you are threatening me. Tyler leaned forward, voice low. Stop, he said. Stop rewriting this. Dad leaving was not Erin's fault. And this is not about sacrifice. This is about consent. Paige nodded. You do not get to use us financially and emotionally, and then call it love. My mother looked around the screen, her eyes darting, realizing something she had never fully faced before. We were not splitting off one by one. We were standing together. You are all abandoning me, she said. After everything I have done. No, Paige said. We are setting boundaries. That word seemed to enrage her more than anything else. Boundaries, she snapped. That is therapist nonsense. Families do not have boundaries. Families have loyalty. I spoke slowly. Loyalty does not mean silence when someone hurts you. Her shoulders slumped, just for a second, and I saw something raw flicker there, fear without a script. Then it hardened again. If you push this, she said coldly, you will destroy this family. I thought about Easter. About her finger pointed at my chest. About how she had already said those words before. This family was already fractured, I said. I just stopped pretending it was whole. She stared at me like she did not recognize me. So what now? She asked. Are you cutting me off? Is that what this is? I took a breath. No, I said. This is not a punishment. This is a pause. Until everything in my name is explained and removed, Until there is accountability, I am stepping back. Stepping back? She repeated, like a foreign language. It means, I said, no more paperwork, no more financial entanglement, no more private calls where you rewrite what happened. Everything goes through writing. Everything is transparent. She laughed softly, bitter. You think you have power now. I did not answer that. I did not need to. The call ended without resolution. No apology. No agreement. My mother logged off abruptly, her square disappearing from the screen like before. Paige and Tyler stayed on, both of them silent. Well, Tyler said finally. That was bad. Paige rubbed her temples. She is not going to let this go quietly. I know, I said, and neither am I. In the days that followed, the consequences spread quickly. Relatives reached out cautiously, carefully worded messages asking if everything was okay. Some were genuinely concerned, others were fishing for information. I told the truth simply. There were financial issues. I am protecting myself. I am not discussing details. Some backed off. Some did not. My mother stopped calling me directly. Instead, she posted vague messages online about betrayal and ungrateful children. She cried to friends. She told anyone who would listen that she was being punished for doing her best. And something unexpected happened. People started asking her questions. Not accusatory ones. Curious ones. The kind she could not easily cry her way out of. Why was Aaron's name involved? Why were signatures needed? Why the secrecy? I heard about it secondhand, through Paige, through Tyler. Each question chipped away at the story she had controlled for years. Practical consequences followed. Paige canceled a planned vacation with her. Tyler stopped covering expenses he had quietly been handling. Family plans became uncertain, tentative. My mother was no longer the automatic center of everything. Watching that happen was not satisfying. It was sad. I grieved the mother I had wanted, the one who could have said, I am sorry, and meant it. I grieved the version of our family that only existed because I absorbed the damage. Some nights I cried, alone on my couch, the weight of it all settling in. Winning, if you could call it that, felt heavy. But beneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. I woke up without checking my phone in panic. I made plans without calculating how she would react. I spoke without rehearsing apologies. One evening, sitting by myself, I realized I was no longer bracing for impact all the time. The constant tension I had lived with for decades had loosened its grip. The family would never be the same after this. That was clear now. Lines had been drawn. Trust had been broken. And for the first time, that was not my responsibility to fix. I looked around my quiet apartment, the soft light, the steady stillness, and understood something deeply. The cost of telling the truth was high, but the cost of staying silent had been higher. Whatever came next, I would meet it without shrinking. That was the line I would not cross again. The weeks that followed felt oddly suspended, like time had slowed just enough for me to notice how much energy I had spent my entire life anticipating my mother's reactions. Without the constant pull of her moods, days stretched out in unfamiliar ways. Not peaceful exactly, just quieter, less charged. At first, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I woke up each morning half expecting a crisis message, a demand, a new accusation that would yank me back into the old rhythm. Instead, what came were fragments, indirect messages, secondhand reports, the echo of a storm that had lost its center. Paige told me our mother had stopped calling her every day. When she did call, the conversation circled the same points: how betrayed she felt, how no one appreciated her, how everything was being taken out of context. But something had changed. Paige did not rush to soothe her anymore. She listened, responded briefly, and ended the calls when they turned sharp. Tyler did the same. That alone shifted the balance more than any confrontation ever had. For the first time, my mother was talking without an audience trained to absorb her emotions. And without that absorption, her words landed differently. I heard through an aunt that she had gone to the bank furious, demanding answers, only to be told she needed to resolve issues tied to my name before anything could move forward. I heard she left in tears. I heard she blamed me for humiliating her. I heard she said she never imagined her own daughter would turn on her like this. I also heard something else. I heard she was scared. Not of losing me, of losing control. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, Paige came over with takeout and sat on my couch like she had done 100 times before, but this time she did not immediately start talking. She ate quietly, picking at her food, eyes unfocused. She finally spoke when our containers were half empty. "I keep thinking about how normal all of this felt to us," she said. "Growing up, the guilt, the pressure, the way we always adjusted ourselves around her moods." I nodded. It was normal because it was all we knew. Paige swallowed. "I keep wondering how much of my life I shaped around keeping her calm." That question lingered in the room between us. It was not just mine to carry anymore. Tyler called later that night, his voice steadier than I had heard it in years. He told me he had said no to her for the first time that afternoon. Just no. No explanation. No justification. He sounded shaken and proud at the same time. She did not handle it well, he admitted. But she survived. That was the thing no one ever said out loud. She always survived. The narrative that she would crumble without us bending ourselves into knots was just that. A narrative. One that kept us compliant. As the days passed, the urgency faded into something duller. The constant emergency energy dissipated. I started noticing small changes in myself that felt almost foreign. I slept better. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I made plans without rehearsing excuses. At work, I caught myself speaking more directly, not apologizing before every opinion. It startled me how connected it all was, how the way I had been taught to manage my mother had seeped into every corner of my life. One evening, as I was washing dishes, my phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment. This was different from the frantic calls before. The timing was ordinary, the hour unremarkable. No build-up through other people. I did not answer. She left a voicemail. I waited until later to listen, when I felt grounded enough to hear her voice without being pulled apart by it. "Aaron," she said, her tone quieter than I expected. "I do not understand why you are doing this. I have been thinking about everything. I know you feel hurt. But you need to understand how hard this has been for me too." There it was. The familiar pivot. She continued. "I never meant to harm you. I did what I thought was best. You always see the worst in me. I do not know how we got here." I deleted the message without replying. Not because it did not affect me. It did. It stirred grief and anger and a deep sadness all at once, but because it was not new. It was the same pattern dressed in softer language, acknowledging my pain without acknowledging her actions. I talked about it in therapy the next day, sitting across from someone who did not know my mother, did not owe her loyalty, did not flinch at my honesty. "You are waiting for accountability," my therapist said gently, "and she is offering explanation instead." That sentence settled into me like truth. Explanation had always been her currency, her way of moving past harm without addressing it. Accountability was something else entirely. A few days later, Paige texted me that our mother had asked her to lunch. Just the two of them. Paige was torn. She wanted to see if something had changed. She also did not want to be cornered. I told her to trust herself, to leave if she felt the old pressure rising. She went. She left early. She told me later that our mother cried, apologized in vague ways, then blamed me for putting ideas in her head. When Paige pushed back gently, our mother shut down and accused her of being cold. Paige sounded tired when she told me, but also clearer. "I see it now," she said. "She does not want to fix things. She wants things to go back." That realization felt like a quiet, closing door. The family did not explode after that. There was no dramatic fallout, no screaming matches or public showdowns. Instead, there was distance. Holidays became uncertain. Plans were made tentatively, sometimes without her. Conversations were shorter. Less emotional labor was offered. My mother tried new strategies. She sent messages that were almost apologies, but not quite. She hinted at illness. She hinted at loneliness. She hinted at regret without ever naming what she regretted. Each time, I responded with the same steady restraint. "I hear you. I am not ready to talk about that. I need things to stay as they are for now." It felt cruel at first. It felt wrong, like I was withholding something essential. But over time, I realized I was not withholding love. I was withholding access. There is a difference. One afternoon, months after Easter, I ran into Mrs. Klein again at the grocery store. She smiled warmly, asked how I was doing. Then she hesitated. "Your mother seems quieter these days," she said carefully. I nodded. "We are taking some space." Mrs. Klein studied my face. "You look—" She searched for the word. "Stronger." I thanked her, though the word startled me. I did not feel strong in the way movies portray strength. I felt grounded, rooted, less willing to abandon myself. That night, alone in my apartment, I thought back to Easter again, to the table, the decorations, the way my mother had pointed at me and said I was the reason everything was falling apart. For years, that accusation would have hollowed me out. Now I saw it clearly. Things had been falling apart long before that lunch. They were just hidden, held together by my silence, my compliance, my willingness to carry what was never mine. When I stopped doing that, the cracks became visible. That was not destruction. That was truth. I did not know yet how this would end. I did not know whether my mother would ever truly take responsibility or whether this distance would become permanent. What I did know was this: I no longer felt like a problem looking for a solution. I felt like a person who had stepped out of a role that was never fair to begin with. And whatever came next, whether reconciliation or continued distance, it would happen on terms that did not require me to disappear. I turned off the lights that night with a sense of quiet resolve, aware that the final shape of our family was still forming. And for the first time, I was not afraid of what it might become. The call came late at night, the kind of hour that used to make my stomach drop before the phone even finished ringing. I was already in bed, lights off, the room quiet except for the hum of the heater kicking on and off. When I saw her name on the screen, I didn't sit up. I didn't rush. I just stared at it for a few seconds, noticing how different my body felt now. Calm, alert, not trapped. I answered. "Hello?" She didn't say my name right away. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like she'd been crying or pacing or both. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," she said. I let the words hang there. Months ago, I would have jumped in to reassure her, to tell her it was okay, to guide her gently into feeling better. This time, I waited. "Then maybe you should just talk honestly," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I've been thinking about Easter," she said. "About that lunch. About what I said to you." My fingers tightened slightly around the phone, but my voice stayed steady. "What have you been thinking?" I asked. She exhaled, slow and shaky. "I shouldn't have said you were the reason everything was falling apart. That wasn't fair." The words landed with weight. Not relief. Weight. Because fairness had never been part of our conversations before. "It wasn't just unfair," I said. "It was humiliating. And it wasn't the first time you'd made me the problem in front of other people." She didn't argue. That, more than anything, made my chest ache. "I grew up believing you were strong enough to handle the truth," she said quietly. "I thought pushing you would make you tougher." I turned onto my side, staring at the dark wall. "I didn't need to be tougher," I said. "I needed to be treated with respect." Her voice cracked. I didn't realize how much I crossed that line. I swallowed. There was a part of me that wanted to cry at those words, to cling to them like proof that everything had been worth it. I didn't. I stayed where I was. "Realizing it now doesn't undo what happened," I said, "or what came out afterward." She knew what I meant. The finances, the control, the panic when I stopped responding. "I was trying to hold everything together," she said. "I was scared." "I know," I replied. "But fear doesn't give you the right to use me, or blame me, or take away my choice." The line was silent for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I don't like who I became when you pulled away." That sentence landed harder than any apology would have. "I saw myself from the outside," she continued. "How desperate I sounded, how angry, how much I needed you to come back so I could feel okay again. That scared me." "It scared me too," I said. "That's why things can't go back to how they were." She inhaled sharply. "So what happens now?" This was the question she always avoided because answers meant limits. "Now," I said, "we have a relationship that doesn't depend on me fixing your feelings, or carrying your stress, or taking responsibility for things that aren't mine." "And if I slip?" she asked quietly. I was honest. Then I stepped back again. She was quiet for a long time after that. When she spoke, her voice sounded older somehow. "I don't want to lose you, Erin." I sat up slowly, propping myself against the headboard. "I don't want to lose myself again," I said. "That's the difference now." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just breathed. We talked a little longer, not about the past, but about the future in careful, unspecific ways. About taking things slowly. About therapy. About giving each other space. When we hung up, I stayed there in the dark, phone resting on my chest, listening to my own heartbeat. There was no rush of joy, no triumphant feeling, just a quiet sense that something fundamental had shifted. In the weeks that followed, that shift became clearer. My mother reached out occasionally, cautiously, as if testing a new language. Sometimes she caught herself mid-guilt trip and stopped. Sometimes she didn't. When she slipped, I named it or disengaged. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't chase her approval when she pulled back. Paige noticed first. "You're different," she said one afternoon when we were walking together, coffee cups in hand. "You don't sound like you're asking permission anymore." I smiled. "I don't think I am." Tyler noticed too. He told me he'd stopped answering calls that came with demands, that he'd started saying no without the whole speech attached. He sounded lighter when he said it, like he hadn't realized how heavy everything had been until he set it down. Holidays changed. Smaller gatherings. Clear plans. No assumption that we'd all orbit one person's expectations. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes it was awkward. Sometimes it hurt. But it was honest. One evening, months after Easter, I found myself driving past my parents' old neighborhood without the usual tightness in my chest. The houses looked the same. The trees. the sidewalks where I'd learned to ride a bike. I realized something then. I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad sometimes, grieving what could have been. But the rage had burned itself out once it no longer had to fight for my reality. That Easter lunch still lives in my memory. The table, the decorations. Her finger pointed at me like a verdict. You're the reason this family is always falling apart. For years, I carried those words like a sentence I had to serve. Now I see them as a turning point. Things did fall apart. The lies, the roles, the expectation that I'd stay silent to keep everyone comfortable. What replaced them wasn't chaos. It was choice. I chose when to engage, when to step back, when to speak, when to rest. I chose myself without burning everything down. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's possible to love your family without letting them hurt you, I want you to hear this. You don't have to scream to be strong. You don't have to explain yourself into exhaustion to be understood. And you don't have to stay at a table where you're only welcome if you're willing to be blamed. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is change the rules quietly and let people decide whether they can meet you there. If this story brought something up for you, I'd really like to hear it. Share your thoughts or your experience in the comments. These conversations matter more than we admit. And if you want to keep listening to stories like this, about family, boundaries, and the slow, quiet kind of revenge that looks a lot like self-respect, stay here. There's more coming.